God has given us a young and noble ruler to reign over us, and thereby awaken our hearts once more to hope. So said Martin Luther about the elected Emperor Charles V in the build-up to the coronation in Aachen in 1520. The same year, Luther also published 3 works: to the Christian nobility of the German nation, urging the young emperor and princes to reform the empire and church; on the Babylonian captivity of the church, in which he attacks the Pope and the 7 sacraments; and the philosophical theological work on the freedom of the Christian, which asserted that true faithful Christians are not bound to any laws, but willingly submit themselves to them. This could of course in no way be misinterpreted by the many Luther-inspired preachers now spreading their own interpretations of the Bible and Luther's writings throughout Germany and causing noticeable unrest. The elected emperor was however dismissive of the causa Lutheri. It was a matter for the church and local authorities. Charles focused on consolidating power in the empire and preparing for a conflict with the King of France. Some say to pave the way for the establishment of universal monarchy. Read Habsburg hegemony. However, at the same time, the difficulties of running a disjointed empire became apparent when a revolt of the Comuneros broke out in Spain. They wanted to replace Charles with his mother. Charles himself could not return to Spain at the moment, but his position was saved by his mother refusing the crown, allowing those loyal to Charles to deal with the revolt. On the 23rd of October 1520 in Aachen, Charles von Habsburg was crowned as King of the Romans and King of Germany. He swore the traditional oath to preserve the Christian faith, uphold the Holy Mother Church, care for the weak, and give due reverence to the Pope. In his coronation capitulations, he promised to defer to the imperial diet and the prince-electors on a number of issues. He agreed to not bring foreign mercenaries into the empire without their consent, and to only hire Germans for the imperial administration. Coincidentally, 1 month earlier, on the 22nd of September, Sultan Selim had died, and as all of his brothers and all but one of his sons were dead, he was peacefully succeeded by his son Suleiman. The First. Upon his succession, it was rumored that Suleiman that the new Sultan was a weak man with a peaceful nature. The Venetian ambassador describing him as a lamb, who did not wield much influence. Rumors also spread that he was facing opposition and rebellion, that he would be unable to rule nor wage war against Christendom. In fact, the new Sultan was facing unrest that would force him into a war with Christendom. His father had spent a good amount of religious and political capital waging war against other Sunni Muslims, so the new Sultan was faced with demands to fight a legitimate enemy and not wage a blatant war of conquest. The Beys in Europe also demanded that their raiding areas be expanded. Some say that, like Charles, the new Sultan was ambitious and viewed himself as a new Alexander, though I'm not sure whether he held that view of himself at the start of his reign. But regardless, by late 1520 the two emperors decided that they were going to war the following year. An Ottoman envoy arrived in Buda in December of 1520, with an offer to extend Sultan Selim's truce, but with deliberately unacceptable extortionate demands for tribute. It was hoped that any negotiation might stall King Louis II's preparations, and any delay or refusal could then be used as an excuse for war. The Diet of the Realm of St. Stephen was sitting when the Sultan's offer arrived, and while some amongst the magnates did advocate for negotiations, they were drowned out by the frenzied and boastful demands for war. What would be the point of negotiations other than an admission of impotence? The last truce was bad enough. Paying the Sultan tribute would also not guarantee any security, as the Ottomans interfered in the internal affairs of their tributaries. And after all, the Hungarians were descendants of the Scythians, who fought Alexander, of Attila, who defeated the Romans. Surely they would defeat the young and weak lamb of a sultan on the field of honor? Anyway, it had a better chance of working than continuing to watch the crumbling defensive system turn into an archipelago of fortified islands in a sea of devastated and depopulated land. In some areas, the situation was so bad that nobody was left to stop people from running away. And besides, there was no guarantee that the Sultan would actually march northwards. It had not happened in decades. So King Louis acquiesced to the frenzied demands of the Diet and threw the Sultan's envoy into the dungeon. This, of course, made Sultan Suleiman particularly angry. He was the only one that got to throw envoys in dungeons. He prepared to march northwards in the spring of 1521. At the Diet held in the imperial free city of Worms in the spring of 1521, elected Emperor Charles had hoped he would simply arrange for the governance of the empire in his absence and secure funds for a war with France. But many of the imperial princes insisted that the Diet take up the causa Luferi and give a hearing to the divisive preacher. Luther had once again refused to recant his teachings, and he burned the papal bull. Not that bull. And he burned the papal bull excommunicating him in late 1520, and he should have been arrested. But the matter had become so inflammatory that no prince opposed to Luther dared move against him without the emperor's backing, while Luther's supporters hoped a hearing would lead to imperial support for church reform. Luther stood defiant before the elected emperor and princes on the 18th of April 1521. He refused to accept any ultimate authority other than the word of God. So long as I cannot be disproved by holy writ or clear reason, I neither can nor will withdraw anything, for it is both criminal and dangerous to act against conscience. The elected Emperor Charles, himself a student of students of Luther's supporter Erasmus, was supportive of church reform. However, following the example of his ancestors, true sons and defenders of the Roman Church, he was determined to hold fast by all that has happened since the Council of Constance. For it is certain that a single monk must err if he stands against the opinion of all Christendom. Otherwise Christendom itself would have erred for more than 1,000 years. I regret that I have delayed so long as to proceed against him. I will not hear him again. He has his safe conduct, but from now on I regard him as a notorious heretic. The Diet ruled against Luther on the 30th of April. The Emperor issued the Edict of Worms ordering Luther's arrest and suppression of his teachings on the 8th of May. By that time, many of the princes that supported Luther and Luther himself had left the Diet. Charles, unlike Emperor Sigismund 100 years before, had kept his word about safe passage. At some point in his journey from the Diet, Luther was kidnapped and imprisoned in the castle of Wartburg by his patron, the Prince Elector of Saxony. As far as Charles was concerned, this was an end to the matter. The Diet accepted Charles's brother Ferdinand as imperial regent in Charles's absence, and later that spring, the King of France made preemptive moves against Charles in the Low Countries. Stephen Barbozzi had observed the Diet of Worms. Let me rephrase that. Stephen Barbozzi was present for Luther's hearing in Worms. He even spoke to Luther, and it left such an impression on him that after he returned to the realm of St. Stephen, he demanded that the anti-heretic laws be applied to Lutherans. But that became a secondary concern, as rumors circulated about a large Ottoman army moving northwards, an army of such size that the realm had not seen since the siege of Belgrade in 1456.